Hello, and welcome back to another Heritage Live. My name is Jasmine Moore. I'm the Heritage Manager and Curator of Collections for Coquitlam Heritage at Mackin House. I would like to first thank Amelia, Adriana, and Sabrina for their help putting this Heritage Live together. Before I begin, I just want to say that Coquitlam Heritage is grateful to operate on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coquitlam, Tsleil-Waututh, Kakate, and Katzie First Nations, all of whom continue to live on these lands and care for them, along with the waters and all that is above and below. With that being said, we're going to begin our Heritage Live. Board games are not boring. Hopefully I can keep your attention for, the next 3/4 of an hour or so. I'm back! You may remember me from some of our longest Heritage Lives featuring the toy trucks, cars, planes, and trains from our collection. We are going with a new format for this live, in which I will only be featuring a few of the board games from our board game collection, so you don't get bored. Keep your eyes peeled, though. More of our games will be launched in the coming months with our new online database. So I've been working really hard for the past year or so trying to pick a database to allow us to put our collections online. And Adriana and Sabrina have been helping me for the past few months, along with some of our other heritage assistants and some of our other board games. We have quite an extensive collection. I think there's probably about, at least 30, maybe 40 board games in our collection. So today we're just going to talk about 3 or 4 of them. Anyway, to begin, I was reminded of the quote about how a boring person tends to say they are bored. So here are some other highlights about boring people. Boring people aren't very funny. Boring people don't have much to say, or they might have too much to say about one particular topic, and I wouldn't know anything about that now, would I? Boring people don't know how to tell a good story, and boring people are usually bored. So with that, let's look at 4 exciting, not boring, board games from our collections. So first up, we have the Game of Life here. This first game will appear very familiar to many of you, and it is in fact one of the only games that I have played from the ones we'll be talking about today. You know it as the inescapable Game of Life. First, a bit about the history of the company to produce this game. So Mr. Milton Bradley was a successful lithographer in the mid-1800s, and for those of you who don't know, lithography is a system of printmaking using oil and water. Using his lithography skills, Bradley invented the checkered Game of Life in 1860. This game featured choices in line with basically virtue or vice, culminating in happy old age at the end of the game. This is what launched Milton Bradley into the game business, making the Game of Life the company's first game. In 1959, a toy inventor named Reuben Clammer came to the Milton Bradley headquarters to propose a plan for an art center to the company's president at the time, James Shea Sr. He was actually turned down, but he started doing research for a 100-year anniversary game that was already kind of in the works at the time and was set to release later that year. He actually found an original copy of Bradley's game. Using the word life as inspiration, he recreated the Game of Life. This game was different from others of its time. Its board included many 3D elements, as you can see here, and a spinner eliminated the need for having dice to move forward on the board. Famous radio and television personality Art Linkletter, was the primary spokesperson. You can see him here down in the lower left-hand corner for this game, and he gave it his personal endorsement. Today, the Game of Life is owned by Hasbro, who acquired Milton Bradley in 1984, and it still remains one of the most popular games. It has been updated many times since then, not just visually, but content-wise as well. For example, players can be rewarded now for recycling, for suing other players, and eventually even for acquiring pets. So the basic premise and rules of this game. So the game is actually quite simple at its core. Don't go bankrupt. Although it may appear to be a race, it is not in fact. The winner is actually decided by the person with the biggest net worth at the end of the game. After a banker is chosen at the beginning, all players receive their starting cash. So this is the original game from the 1960s, and here's our money here. And they must decide first, so the start of the game is here, if they're going to go on to college or straight into business. Depending on the route they choose to take, they will have different tasks to complete and different events to participate in to arrive at retirement, which most of these events and tasks come with a price tag, just like in the real game of life, huh? White spaces actually equal a reward or a penalty. Some of my favorite white spaces include Iceberg Ram's Yacht, sell ice cubes and collect $5,000. Or you bought a phony diamond from your best friend and have to pay $10,000. Green spaces allow you to take revenge on an opponent, in which you can collect $100,000 from another player you choose of your choice, or send any player back 10 spaces. Red spaces also allow for a penalty or a reward when you land on or pass them. Blue spaces allow for another choice to be made when you land on or pass them, but it usually means paying a bit of money out. For example, buying insurance or stocks. So we have some of those here as well. Promissory note. I guess that's when you run out of money. There are many obstacles along both routes, but many opportunities to earn money from the bank and or from other players. At the end of the game, which is, where is it? Over here, you either end up at Millionaire Acres or at the Poor Farm, which actually really demonstrates a generational understanding of success present at the time when this game was invented in the 1960s. The game is mostly based on luck and has been criticized for this, as well as for rewarding risk-taking. So a few fun facts. The game is available in 26 languages. The original 1960 version only cost $6 US, and it can be played by anywhere from 2 to 6 players. And again, so Art Linkletter featured on the cover of this 1960 version of the board game. He was actually a Canadian-born radio and TV personality, who, gained popularity in the United States. He was the host of a show called House Party, which ran on CBS for 25 years, and People Are Funny, airing on NBC radio and TV for about 19 years. He appeared in 4 movies throughout his career, and apparently he actually declined to invest in Walt Disney's theme park as he did not think it would be profitable. Some might say he failed a bit at life there. Hey? Okay. So that's our first game, the game of life. Next up, we have a game of dexterity. Wink, wink. So just give Adriana a second to change them out. It's a little more cumbersome having, larger board games than smaller toys. So you might have guessed, our next game is going to be Tiddlywinks. So Tiddlywinks originated in England and the US during the late Victorian era, around 1890. As time went on, Tiddlywinks became more and more of a phenomenon. The game was patented early on and first submitted in England in 1888 by Joseph Ashton Fincher. And since then, over 80 patents on different Tiddlywinks games have been issued to individuals and game companies such as Parker Brothers, Milton Bradley, and others. Many different versions of the game were made by changing the nature of the winks and the target. So here's a traditional version of the game. So we have our pieces there. Just hold on. And for example, there is ring a peg, or in this case, ring a pin. And I believe this one dates to the 1920s. So in which the discs are replaced with pegs, and the idea is you're trying to shoot your disc or your ring onto the different pegs. There was also a whole winkification of various sports, including croquet, bowling, and baseball. The game became a craze for adults and kids alike during 1890. However, many had very harsh opinions of the game, as some people thought it didn't have enough of an educational purpose. Others said it promoted laziness because it did not require any critical thinking or initiative. Despite these claims, the game prospered into the modern era. The game has undergone many revisions and material upgrades since the beginning of the 20th century, but the foundations remain pretty much the same. There are still actually Tiddlywinks clubs and tournaments happening today. So, some simplified rules. The full rules are actually reported to be about 11 pages long. So Tiddlywinks is based on a simple concept. You want to get your winks, so the smaller discs, to hit the target and get them into the pot. So each player is assigned, the squidger is the larger of the pieces, and then the winks are the small pieces, and each player is given a color. So we have red, yellow, and blue. And a singles game is played with 2 players, each having 2 different colored winks each. A pair game is actually played by 4 players, and each is assigned a separate color, obviously. To decide who starts, players use their squidgers to play towards the pot. The player who gets nearest to the pot wins the squidge off and gets to play first. From there, players take turns shooting their winks at the pot, and it always goes around clockwise. Each player can only shoot once per turn, but they get an extra shot for each wink they have in the pot. If a wink ends up balancing on the edge of the pot, it is considered potted. If you send your wink flying off the mat, then you may lose your next turn. Squapping occurs when a wink is covered by another player's wink. If that occurs, the covered wink cannot be played, and if your winks are all squapped out, you cannot play. If a player pots out, i.e. they get all of their winks into the pot, then the game, squapping ceases. All squapped winks are de-squapped, and players are only allowed to play towards the pot. There's quite a bit of math involved in the scoring, but essentially the player that either gets all his winks into the pot first, or the one who has the most winks in the pot after 20 to 25 minutes wins. In summary, while this game can be strategic, it depends on dexterity and a bit of luck. And I was told that when researching this, the actual history of Tiddlywinks is quite fraught with controversy. There are entire websites and even some PhD theses that are dedicated, or dissertations I should say, that are dedicated to the subject. So now we're moving on to another recognizable name in the game. Wink, wink, Parker Brothers. First, we will look a bit at a game called The Gambler. Now look at this, wholesome family fun of the 1970s. So, this is the pays your money and takes your chances game from Parker Brothers. The original version of this is the original version of this board game, and it was made in 1975. It was actually redesigned in 1977 to look a bit more cartoonish. So essentially, players, take their chance and roll their dice to move around the board. Each player starts with $100, and the end objective is to win $1,000. This definitely would have kept many of our gamblers' interests piqued until most recently when casinos reopened. Now for a bit of history on the Parker Brothers. So George S. Parker was the main founder of Parker Brothers. He was born in 1867 in Salem, Massachusetts. He was the youngest of 3 sons, and he really loved playing board games. He invented his first game at 16 years old called Banking to teach people about finances, as well as to entertain. The game was officially published in 1883 and was successful enough for Parker to decide to start his own company. Eventually, his brothers Charles and Edward joined him to form the Parker Brothers, and from then on, it continued being a family-run business during his lifetime. Parker died in 1953 at the age of 86 during a revolution in the board game world. By the time of his death, he had invented over 100 games. Parker Brothers was officially founded during the late 1880s. As the company grew, the 3 brothers, most notably George, invented most games, but the company also often bought the rights to many other games. This included popular games like ping pong and later mahjong. Parker Brothers was also one of the first game companies to advertise their products in newspapers and magazines, a phenomenon that began at the beginning of the 20th century. This was also around the time they started focusing on card games such as Pit, Flinch, and Rook. And Rook actually became the company's top game before the introduction of Monopoly. In 1935, Parker Brothers first released Monopoly. Originally known as the Landlord's Game, it was initially rejected by Parker Brothers due to a lack of objective and overall number of pieces. It was redesigned by Charles Darrow to become Monopoly. Eventually, Robert Barton, George's son-in-law, bought a copy of the game from Charles, and he actually ended up playing it till 1 a.m. His enthusiasm for the game created quite a stir, and it was finally accepted by the company and ended up making an incredible profit. At one point, the demand for Monopoly equaled 20,000 copies per week. Monopoly solidified the Parker Brothers' place as a game giant and made them a staple in every home around the world. I personally have never really enjoyed Monopoly. I know that may be very controversial to say, but I was really more of a Clue girl myself growing up. After World War II and the death of George Parker, the company's management bounced around quite a bit. They were bought by General Mills in 1968. They then branched off with Kenner Toys to become Kenner Parker Toys, Inc., which was bought by Tonka in 1987. 3 years later, Tonka was bought by Hasbro, which is now the leading toy corporation in North America. Some of their popular games include Monopoly, Clue, Risk, Sorry, and interestingly enough, Nerf products. Next, we will talk about another Parker Brothers game, What's It? Who's It? So, Who's It is another game from the 1970s. This is a character guessing game. Trademarked in 1977 by Parker Brothers, and it was actually made in Canada. And I forgot to mention, the last game was also made in Canada. It was made in Ontario. So, the rules. We have various characters. And basically, each player asks other players questions to figure out who the character is. So we'll go over a bit of the rules. 5 to 7 question cards are dealt to each player depending on the amount of people playing the game. The remaining question cards are placed onto the board, and the character cards are shuffled. Oh, do you want it over? Sorry, not listening to my directions. You see it? Better? Yeah. Okay. So the remaining question cards are put on the board. The character cards are shuffled, and one is given to each player, and it is meant to be kept a secret. And the remaining character cards are placed off to the side. On your turn, you may ask any other player a question from one of the cards in your hand. All questions must be either answered yes or no. If a player answers yes, the card is placed face up on the board. in front of the player who was asked, with the words facing towards the center of the table. The question card is now a visual cue for all the other players so that you know what questions have been asked and what questions maybe haven't been asked. As long as you receive a yes, you may draw a new question card from the deck and ask another question. You may ask the same player or any other player a question. When you receive a no, you may elect to try to guess the identity of any of or all of the players. If you receive a no, place your question card face up in the discard pile at the center of the board and draw a new card from the deck. With the exception of the 4 corner spaces, so the director, the spy, the gangster, or the censor, all players must answer all questions correctly. Now, this is where it gets interesting because the spy and the gangster must lie. However, answering the opposite information on the card than what is on the card, the censor must say no to every question, and the director is probably the most difficult to guess because they may answer yes or no to any question, and they have to kind of be guessed by a process of elimination, or they might get trapped by their own trickiness. It is often wise to choose another character on the board and answer all the questions as if you were that other character if you're playing the director. When you think you know who the players are, you're supposed to announce it to the table, and then announce the identity of every player in the game, and then this is the answer box, and it is passed around to the players, and they must put in a yes or a no chip into, depending on which slot, and then it is, all corner characters must answer correctly and honestly when their identity is being guessed. It is good to note that this particular game contained characters and questions that would be considered extremely inappropriate today, and even very racist. It does, like the 1960s version of the Game of Life, reveal a lot about what was going on in the 1970s, including harmful stereotypes that were very popular at the time. So, anyway, keep your eye. Okay, so we're back. Sorry about that. So while I have played some of those games, I haven't played them all. And my favorite board game, or, well, really it's more of a card game because you don't play on a board, would have to be Smash Up, seen here. And this is my big geeky box. So for this game, you buy, your core set of cards, which come with bases, and then you have minions and you have actions. And then you're able to buy all kinds of expansion packs. And these are some of the characters that you can be. And this is such a fun game. I really miss it. We play it usually when we go camping. And so that's my favorite game. I highly recommend it, especially if you're a nerd like me. My other favorite game would have to be my Lord of the Rings game because it has some absolutely amazing artwork. And who doesn't want to be a hobbit? However, I never managed to make it past Moria in that game. There are 4 boards and multiple players, and it can take up to an hour just to get it all set up because it's very complex. I didn't bring it today because it's lost somewhere in the depths of my storage unit, but I highly recommend you check it out if you're a Tolkien fan, like me. So, do you have a favorite board game? Comment and let us know below if you do. And thank you very much for tuning in today. I will see you again soon.